Hello everyone, I hope you all are doing great and I hope that you all are studying well these days and I hope your studies are going as they are expected. So, wishing you a good luck and continuing our today's class. Today's class is about public policy formulation and analysis. The focus will be on public policy formulation and analysis. As we discussed in our previous classes, and in my previous session, we focused on policy. We primarily focused on policy and the question how a specific policy can be formulated, and after that formulation how that policy is to be analyzed by the analysts, by the public, or by the political figures or the intelligentsia, academicians and other analysts who decipher the policy, who break down the policy into different levels and understand the reason, understand the meaning behind the policy, understand the requirement behind the policy, the formulation of policy. So this is how today's class is going to happen. So moving towards the next slide. This is the addition. This is, you can say, the addition from my side, that this policy, while studying this course, I find the opportunity to tell my students that the essential skills for public servants to formulate and implement policy. Public servants are the civil servants. Public servants are the machinery of a government in which they conduct their, you can say, business, conduct their daily official work for the betterment of people. So when we are analyzing a policy, when we are analyzing some, you can say, the ingredients of policy, we focus we focus on uh, its force, the force behind that policy, which is using. So the policy, when we discuss policy, that means that we are deciphering the policy from its machinery, from its beginning to its end. So the main ingredient, the main force behind any policy, which makes that policy successful, is the machinery behind that policy, and that machinery is public servants. How they are going to analyze that policy, how they are going to implement a certain policy which comes to their hand by the policymakers, by the elite group who create a policy for a certain matter. So this is my addition in this slide, that I got a chance to tell you that how civil servants are important and how civil servants have their place inside the government to conduct or formulate and implement any policy for the betterment of people, because our goal is to serve people, because the goal of the public servants is to serve people. So in this course, in public policy formulation, we take this as a base of every policy. We take this as the fundamental of every policy in which we are serving the people of any country, of any nation state. So this is something bonus for you. And moving towards the sequence, this session is like this. What is policy? Secondly, we will discuss sources of policy formulation. Then third, we will discuss policy formulation process. Fourth will be features of a good policy. Fifth will be policy formulation in developing countries like Pakistan's experience. And last, conclusion. This will be the sequence of our session. Moving towards the next slide. Okay, introduction. Introduction of what? Let me ask a question. Let me start this with a question, that introduction of what? What I'm going to introduce to you. So I'm going to read out some text from the slide, and then I will go into the explanation of that text. So the quality of governance in a country is dependent on its capacity of effectively formulate and implement sound socio-economic policies. So here, what is the key term? I'm going to highlight that term for you so that you may understand that what is important in this point. So follow my yellow marker. Yes, socio-economic. The main important characteristic socio-economic policies. It is the benefit for the people, so society is involved and the economy is involved. When you combine the two terms in a society, when you combine the benefit of people in a society regarding economic system, whatsoever it is, uh, it becomes the entity of the policy. It becomes the very valid, you can say, consolidating point for a policy. Because every policy, as we discussed in our previous classes, that every good policy revolves around socio-economic system. So in this point, the focus is on socio-economic policies. Secondly, the policy formulation is the responsibility of elected members. There is no doubt in this. It is the responsibility of elected members. But I'm repeating my point, my previous point, in which I related that point, related the civil servants with this, is that the implementation process rests with the public servants. The policy was formulated by the elected members, and that policy, the implementation rests with the public servants. So this is a chain, this is a process from A to B. You can see from implementation, from the, you can say, elected members to the public servants. But why? Why this is a chain? Why public servants are so important in this paradigm? To serve the public, to serve the people. A policy is implemented by the civil servants to ensure the safety and the, you can say, benefits for the people. Number three, however, civil servants also play a pivotal role in policy formulation as they prepare the draft policy. Let me ask a question here, and you should ask yourself as well when formulating a policy, that what is preparation of draft policy? Civil servants and draft policy, how they are related to each other? They are related to each other as they make a policy for any certain issue, like health issue, for example. For instance, let me give you the example of sorry, health policy. There are a number of cases regarding health, regarding, you can say, any health situation. the public servants draft a policy statement, draft initial stages of a policy, initial stages of the problem, and indicate the government about that problem, and send that draft to the policy makers, who will by then react on that draft, and they compile or formulate a kind of concrete policy, a kind of very important policy, very fundamental policy regarding health. So, going further, this presentation, this session explains the way policies are formulated and steps involved and the activities to be performed in the various steps. This is the introduction. The last point is the introduction of my session with you, which is in which I am going to present policies and how the way they are formulated and the activities performed through various subjects, steps. Moving further. Okay, let me start with a very fundamental question. My focus is always on the basic concept of policy, because if you don't know this, it is useless for everyone to understand. It is useless to understand the process. If you don't know the policy, if you don't know the mechanics, you cannot create a machine. You cannot build a design without knowing the mechanics of any, you can say, machine. So policy being its core mechanics, policy regarding its core mechanics in the field of policy formulation and analysis, we try to understand policy as clear as we can. So I told you different definitions of policy, and one of is I have written this in this section, and I'm highlighting this yellow. Purposive course of action. You all can recall to your mind, and you all can remember this definition by Anderson given in 1994. So this is the bit, you can say, a recap of the previous class. You can study the meaning of policy, the definition of policy. Then what are the features of policy? Features that how a good policy works, how a policy is a policy, how a policy can become a policy, what we call a statement, and how and why we call a statement a policy. There are certain, you can say, points which indicate the features of the policy. So number one is not a random act, rather a deliberate action, which means that a policymaker cannot just create a random act. A policymaker just cannot come forward and tell people about any act and regard that act a policy. No, that cannot be the case. The case is, it is a deliberate action. Deliberate means, okay, let me ask what deliberate means. Deliberate means the way you are going, the way you plan something, the way you do something with your conscious mind is a deliberate action. So deliberate action in which your conscious mind is involved, in which your efforts are involved, that act is called a policy. And this is the very first and important feature of a policy. You cannot claim any random act, like government reduced the price of medicines. It seems that this is a random act, but this cannot be a random act, because government deliberated, government uh, draw conclusions, government ran cost benefit analysis. And after doing that, after thinking all scenarios and all aspects, all contingencies, they reduced the price of medicines or the flour or the rice or the jute. So this is not a random act. Another most important feature of policy is the policy is approved by public representatives, applicable by state apparatus. Again, there are two different terms, two uh, alien terms which need the explanation. Public representatives. Who are the public representatives? I assume that you all understand what is the meaning of public representative. Public representatives are the people who are elected by the people, who represent their constituency. If they don't approve, if they don't sanction the policy cannot be implemented. The policy cannot be strengthened. So it is very important for a statement, for a line of action, for a thought to become a policy, that it must approved by the people representative, by the public representatives, and also applicable by state apparatus. What is state apparatus? Yes, state apparatus. I am highlighting this so that you remember while taking notes. State apparatus are the public servants, the machinery, as I discussed before. So, this is a process from A to B, approved by public servants, public representatives, like elected persons, like prime minister, ministers, and the body, the entire cabinet. And after the approval, after they approve this, the state will apply the policy. If the state is not taking responsibility of any policy, that can never be a policy. State is important. The state, a policy which is endorsed by state is a policy. Which is not endorsed by a state can never be a policy. Okay, moving forward, not a piece of legislation, but it has its own sanctity. Yes, I was talking about legislation and its sanctity. It is not a piece of legislation. It is not a law. It is not considered or claimed as a law by court or by any body which endorse it, but it has its own sanctity, means that it has its own standing. It has its own legitimacy because it is endorsed by the state, because it is implemented by the state, and state is responsible for its sanctity, for its validity. So at the same time, a policy is not a legislation, but it is, to understand, to tell you more clearly, it can be regarded as a law, because behind that policy there is always a state. So state endorsement is important for its sanctity, for its validity. Third point is distinct from strategy to implement it. I told you about the definition. I asked you to write the definition in my previous class. The strategy, the meaning of strategy, which is different from policy itself. Strategy is, you can say, a big plan, point from point A to point B, means to achieve the ends. But the policy is not strategy. It is different from the strategy. Strategy. Policy is the part of strategy, but a strategy cannot be a policy. So there is a very slight distinction between policy and the strategy. Fourth is it could be a part of an overall developmental policy, a development policy. If I create this circle here to elaborate my point to you, like this, follow my circle. This is, you can say, a development policy. This is the whole policy which I draw in front of you. And every other policy, every other, you can say, policy is the uh, part of that development policy. National development strategy, you can say that, or it could be a specific developmental policy like food security policy, like health security, like education policy, like building of new schools, like building of new hospitals, infrastructures, creating new jobs in the market. They all revolve around the one huge policy, which is developmental policy. Yes. After that, there are components of policy. Statement of facts. Why need for the policy? That we need facts, we need data from different bodies, from different governmental structures. So, statement of facts. Why need for this policy? Why we want this policy? People ask, people raise questions from their electeds, from the public representatives, that why we need the policy. Number one, the one explanation of this is that. And second is general clauses, means what make a policy, what defines a policy, definitions of terms used. A policy is a complete document. If we want to know the components of a policy, we uh, dissect that document into different pieces like this: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Number one is we discuss facts in that policy document. Always remember that when you are deciphering, when you are analyzing a policy statement, when you are analyzing a policy document, you will have a paper, you will have a document in front of you, and you will analyze that document with these steps. You can separate the statement of facts, that why we need the policy, that will be included in that paper, that will be included and in that document. Number three, the definitions of terms used in that policy document. Number three, policy directions, the broad outlines of what to do for the clarity of the civil servants, for the clarity of the machinery which are going to run the policy in a country or in a province or in a city. So, number one, you are to see the facts. Why we need this policy? If you have any policy in your mind, let's suppose clean and green policy. We talked in our classes. I will continue that. The green and clean Pakistan is, we can take that as an example. First, we see the fact. Why we need this policy? Second, general clauses. The definition used, the terms used in that policy, like green, clean, infrastructure, everything will be defined in that document. Number three, policy directions. Directions from the ministries, directions from the horticulture ministry to the departments working in the country, working inside the cities and the rural areas, telling the broad outlines of what to do or what not to do. After that, policy measures, specific actions by whom? Like it is to give the responsibility, channelizing the different responsibilities to the bodies of people of the state. Institutional mechanism, responsible authorities, that who will be responsible. There are a number of people involved in a policy of clean and green, but who are responsible, who can give answers to the authorities, to the policy makers who devised that policy, who formulated that policy. And repel clauses, redundant clauses, the clauses which cannot be used, the clauses which are obsolete and which are the counterproductive in the policy, implementation. So these are the components of policy.